Hello and welcome to our Petit Pods. These are little bite-sized pieces of information for you to take away with you, listen wherever you want. They're going to be short, probably going to be to the point, and we hope you enjoy them. Well, hello and welcome to our very first Petit Pod. I was thinking of Petit Point when we came up with this idea. See, so Petit Pod, it kind of fits because they're just little nuggets of information that might help you on your writing journey. Now, the first thing that I wanted to talk about just in this little nugget is a few tips for writing speech. Now, I don't mean the sort of technicalities of writing speech and how you use speech, but just the punctuation of it, because there are things that crop up quite frequently when I'm editing books where writers just haven't got it quite right. So a few little pointers. Where you've got a stream of dialogue with two or more speakers, every time there's a change of speaker, you start on a new line. So that's a new line, which means a new paragraph, and you indent that speech. So, for example, if you've got, "Hello," said Michelle. "Hi, how are you?" Sarah replied. "I'm fine, you?" "Yeah, all well here." So each of those 4 lines of speech will all start on a new line. They'll all be indented, because that new line will be a new paragraph as well. Obviously, if the speech carries on to another line, if it's a long speech, "Hello, I'm going to the library. Would you like to join me? Let's go and have a sandwich later." That's obviously going to run onto 2 lines of speech. So it's only the first line that's indented as its paragraph. But you must, every time you start a new speech, it's a new line. And then to punctuate that speech, you're enclosing each little bit within speech marks. So open speech mark, "Hi, how are you?" Question mark, close speech mark. Now you notice the question mark also goes inside the speech mark. So every little bit of punctuation that belongs with your dialogue always goes inside the speech mark, not outside the speech mark. If you think of it as the speech mark is just the opening, and the closing speech marks are just enclosing everything to do with that speech. Open speech mark, "How are you?" Question mark, close speech mark. It goes inside, not outside. And then with speech marks, you've probably noticed that you sometimes get double speech marks or you get single speech marks. It really doesn't matter which you use. In the UK, I think in book publishing, we would tend to see singles, and in the US, more likely doubles. And I think as well, different publishers will have their own style.
Yeah. I much prefer single. I think double looks old-fashioned in my view. I much prefer single.
It's just not so neat, I think. It's just like you only need one little indicator that there's speech rather than. But then if by any chance you're reporting speech, so say Sarah said, "I saw John the other day and he said, 'Hello, why don't we go for a coffee?'" If you've got double speech marks for Sarah said hello, then the speech marks within that for the speech that you're reporting, so John said, "Why don't we go for a coffee?" they'll be singles. So it's always singles within doubles or doubles within singles.
Yes.
It's very complicated to talk about this stuff. It's easier when you can see it written down. But
are there ever an instance where if someone new is talking, it's in the same paragraph? I'm sure I've seen that in books.
It should be that whenever a new person starts to speak, that it always starts on a new line, even if it's just one word.
What happens then, and maybe this is why I'm getting confused. So perhaps let's just say John is speaking. Okay, so he's saying, "I'm going to go grab a coffee." He said, "Let's go over there to the coffee shop." Now that all stays in a paragraph, doesn't it?
Yes, that's a continuation. So where one person is speaking, their speech will stay within the same paragraph. But as soon as someone new takes over, the only exception to that is if, for whatever reason, your character was involved in a very long speech. So maybe they were talking about something for a couple of lines and then they have a change of thought and then they start speaking about something else. "Oh, by the way," and went off in a different direction. Then you could break their speech into a new paragraph, as you would just break up an ordinary paragraph. So in which case, wouldn't close the speech mark at the end of the paragraph because it's a continuation of that same speech, but you would open the speech mark again at the
I've
beginning of
seen
the
that.
next paragraph.
Yeah, I've seen that. And I've always been slightly confused as to, well, why haven't they closed it? But yeah, I've seen that before where,
because it's the same person speaking. So you only close the speech mark when that person has finally
finished.
Shut up, basically.
Yeah.
I hope that doesn't sound too confusing. And then just finally, speech tags. We've talked about speech tags before. I know, Alexa, too, you're not keen on constantly saying he said, she said.
Hate them.
I think if there's a conversation with 3 or more people, you probably have to use them a bit more because it could get confusing. Yep. But if you've got just 2 people having a conversation, you know where the conversation started, who started saying those words, then it's fairly easy to follow. The new line, the new opening speech mark, that'll be the next person speaking, and you know that you've just got these 2 characters. So you don't always have to use them, but there's also, you just have to be careful the words that you use. Because I've done it in the past. You can't laugh a word. You can't, well, you kind of can, but not in writing. You can't sigh a word or smile a word. So, hello, she smiled. You can say, hello, she said with a smile, or she smiled. Hello, she said. There's other ways to do it rather than actually using the tags laughed, sighed, smiled. Oh, I can't think of any others.
And a lot of the time, you don't need a speech tag at all. Funnily enough, there was a LinkedIn post about this just the other day, and someone opened up the LinkedIn post with a red flag alert. Someone on TikTok has just said you should get rid of 50% of your speech tags. And I'm like, well, that isn't a red flag to me. I kind of agree. And it was quite a debate, actually, because there was a big majority of people who said, well, he said, she said, you just, you don't even see it. You just glance over it. And I'm like, you're not getting away with that because I see it and it annoys me. But the other thing is, and I've talked about this before when we talked about this in our, in the bigger episode, be careful what adjective you then do use if you're not going to say he said. Because there's one author that I read and she uses mumbled like 5 times on a page. And I just want to scream. Like, but please, mumbled is, a lot of people, don't mumble. And also, another one, when you're writing drama, don't assume your characters are going to shout or scream. Because actually, if you think how many times you shout or scream in your day-to-day living. I can't remember the last time I shouted. I can't remember the last time I screamed. And yet you'll read an action book and suddenly all the characters are screaming, yelling, shouting all the time. And that's just not realistic.
No, so I think words that you can use commonly that are actual speaking words, said, called, whispered, grunted, replied, answered, and maybe muttered. Things like that, where they're an actual utterance. You're uttering the words with those words. But laughing, sighed, smiled, not so much. But as I say, there are ways around it. You can still tell people that that's what's going on without actually having them say the word with that tag.
Yeah, and also not everyone says something in a weird way. I mean, our conversation we're having now, Alexa, we're just saying stuff, right? We're not mumbling, muttered, whispering, shouting, yelling, mumbled. We're not doing any of those. We're just talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we wouldn't need, if we were to somehow put our recording a Petit Pod into a drama, we wouldn't need to use any speech tag at all. It would just be Alexa 1, Alexa 2. I mean, that might get a bit confusing because we're both called Alexa 1 and Alexa 2. But we wouldn't need to use any other words, would we? We could just have each of us on a different line talking.
Yes, yes. I do sometimes come across dialogue where I will occasionally add a speech tag because I feel as though there hasn't been one for a little while and it just needs something. It just needs it there to point it just to make sure that you haven't lost track. But yeah, you don't need them, I think, probably as much as writers might use them.
Where can people go to find out? Because we're coming up to the end of our first little mini pod. Where can people go to find out the rules of how to learn, how to write speech? Where's a good place to go? Is Readsy, do they have a good blog on that? Where's a good place to go for?
Readsy would definitely, they've got information on all sorts of things. There are different manuals of style, the Chicago Manual of Style. If you were just to Google how to punctuate speech, it comes up with just a myriad of posts on how to do it with examples. So there's plenty of information on how to do that.
But it is important, hence why we've made a little Petit Pod about it.
Yeah. So I just hope it was all clear. But anyway, punctuation goes inside the speech marks. Speech is contained inside speech marks. New line, new paragraph for every new speech. And make sure your speech tags are actually speech tags and not some other form of noise.
or description of facial features when you can sigh. You can sigh a word, but you can't frown a word, can you?
No, or shrug a word.
Or shrug a word, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's it for this mini Petit Pod. The next one we're going to be talking about is, well, you'll just have to wait and see. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.